Hello, welcome, and thank you for coming to this presentation on the mechanics of forgiveness. My name is Elizabeth A. Wilson, and I am an ontologist and the co-founder of Kerin School of Thought. Ontology is the study and mastery of the art of becoming, the part of life that has to do with growing up. And at Kerin School of Thought, we share frameworks for thinking and feeling and moving in a way that upholds an enlightened lifestyle. And you've come today because you're interested in the how-to of forgiveness. There are metaphysical mechanics to support these rather esoteric and ungraspable concepts. Now, there is one truth that I'm going to tell you, and that is something I want to assure you right now is absolutely fundamentally true. You are not unforgivable or irredeemable, and you need to restore your innocence in your self-awareness now. Why? Why am I giving the impression of such urgency? I will tell you. The world is changing very, very rapidly. There's a good chance that we haven't seen the worst of it yet, nor have we potentially arrived at the core of what we are collectively detoxing. We've chosen love, which means that everything unlike love has to come up and through us. There are turbulent times ahead, my friends, and everyone, Lightworkers especially, need to act quickly and take wise steps to establish the new world. That's not possible when our awareness is still influenced by the traumas and stories of old, right? That makes sense, doesn't it? Our experience of truth is warped by our perspective when that perspective is formed by pain. It's like trying to compose a sweet piano overture when there's Black Sabbath playing in the background, right? So now is the time to forgive and to release that hurt. But there are questions that keep coming up. Now, I sit with hundreds and hundreds of clients a year dealing with life, dealing with how to do the lifing. And there are certain questions that come up around forgiveness and why it's so tricky that come up again and again. And I'm going to address those three questions. One of them is, why is self-forgiveness so much harder than forgiving others? The next is, why are certain things so sticky? Like when you've already decided to forgive and move on, but then the whispers of bitterness and regret keep striking false notes in your heart. And of course, the third question is, how do I actually do it? How do we do the forgiveness? How do we permanently release, liberate, free ourselves from the ties that bind us to old stories of pain? How do we do that? I'm going to address these three questions specifically because they're the ones that I see coming again and again. Now, the last one, how do we do it? That's the simplest one. So I'm going to address that last. But the first two do need a little bit of examination. I'm going to address each of those in turn. But first, I'm going to show you a framework that will help you visualize the correlation between how forgiveness moves in the mind, how it moves in the energy field, and how it moves in your day-to-day life. So my notepad's down there. Got it. Now check it out. This is going to help understand some things in context. Now we agree, right, that on a macrocosmic level, we are all connected in one great big field of truth, a great big field of knowing, a field of essence, whatever you'd like to say. We know that we're all interconnected. We understand that quantum physically, and we understand that spiritually. We know that it's true. We also know that the first aspect of this field that moves is spirit. It was the breath that moves upon the waters. That's Genesis 1:2. So it's really, really primordial stuff. The first part of creation, beyond this field of unformed potential, beyond this field of consciousness, is spirit, it's essence. That essence is drawn out from the whole and it is condensed, laser focused, if you will, into an individuality, which we will call you. This is your human consciousness right here. Now, what happens in this condensation, you could say, is that within this human consciousness is the knowing of the fruit of good and evil, if you would like. It's the knowledge, the knowing of value, the knowing of other than. And so the effect of this is very similar to if the sunshine shines through a prism and then refracts. So what happens here is that fullness, allness, wholeness refracts into value, into things that we get to experience, we get to judge, we get to say this is good and this is bad, and this is somewhere in the middle, this is right and left, this is right and wrong, whatever it may be. We get to place value on things. These values become stories that we tell ourselves about what is true about us and others, and these stories are embedded in our consciousness, written into our DNA, passed down through generations, and also picked up and chosen out of the collective. Yes? Now what happens is that these stories are a little bit like stories in a stained glass window in a cathedral. What happens is that unformed creative life force, or the creative essence or power spirit, moves through the window in our consciousness, takes on the shapes and the stories, the textures and the colors of those truths that we've told ourselves or that we've chosen to adopt and to make true about the world, and projects those same stories out into what some people call the hologram, but it is the quantum field. What happens with this projection is that this projection has taken on the same quality as the stories in the windows, and it forms a projection just as the window in the stained glass window in the cathedral would form a projection that would land on the floor. And life itself scurries to meet it. We magnetize the people, the articles, the whatnot, that confirms that what we believe, the stories we tell in the windows, confirms that these things are in fact true. And that's why you can have two people having the same experience or being in the same circumstance and having two completely different experiences. It's because they're looking at it through different windows, through different frameworks of understanding, right? Now, what happens is in life is that we walk around meeting the evidence of what we believe is true. That evidence, particularly if it's reflecting something painful from the past, is that it triggers something in us. It triggers a stress response. This is an emotional response. Now, emotion and feeling is not the same. Your emotions are a biological response. That is a chemical response that happens where the cells in your body inform the brain that there's danger nearby, there's a threat nearby, and the brain responds to that again by dumping a bunch of stress hormones in the gut. That's why Hippocrates said that all disease starts in the gut. Perhaps it's not true to say it starts in the gut, because of course it starts in the window where the ideal, the paradigm is held, but the gut is certainly the first place where disease manifests. This is where dissonance, unformed, energetic, esoteric dissonance manifests into something real and visceral and relatable. This is disease in the body, right? This is the feeling of being uncomfortable. What happens, of course, then is that you have a particular body chemistry. Your body chemistry is your most intimate environment that you are experiencing life in. That body chemistry ignites a particular mindset or mind frame that corresponds to that particular frequency. So these thoughts start whizzing around in the brain and create neural pathways that become entrained by the age of 12. Very, very hard to shift. Now, these thoughts cause feelings, right? Remember I said emotion and feeling is not the same thing. Emotions cause thoughts, thoughts cause feelings. Feelings are also a vibrational output. You see, the energetic projection is made of brainwave and heartwave electromagnetic output and other subtle energies. These become your point of attraction. And of course, again, life scurries to meet that energetic output. So what we end up with is a cycle response. We end up with with a negative cycle, you could say. Right? So I'm going to use this framework throughout this presentation, and I'm going to refer back to it a few times to cement a point or to highlight a point. It's useful, isn't it? It's kind of pretty. I wish I had more colored pens, but this will do. Now, I have written the 3 questions I get asked the most often. I've already said them to you, but I'm going to say them again. Number 1, why is self-forgiveness harder than forgiving others? It all comes down to self-forgiveness, doesn't it? Because as we see here, our experience of others has a lot to do with our experience of ourselves. So we need to talk about why self-forgiveness is harder than other things. I'm also going to talk about why are certain things stickier than others? Why can I forgive certain things easy and other things really, really difficultly? And third, how do we actually do the forgiving? I'm going to start with why is forgiving myself harder than forgiving others? And let me talk about a few things there. First of all, self-forgiveness means facing the perpetrator energy. Now, facing the victim energy is easier. No one likes being called a victim, but it is much easier to face the victim in us than it is to face the perpetrator. Now remember, or maybe you don't remember, when you were a tiny little baby, your first wounds or your first experience of sadness or harm or being a victim, or expressing victimhood to parents would have been received or responded to with comfort, with safety, and with maybe a lullaby, at least for the first few years of our life, right? However, the experience of perpetrator comes with it, brings with it harm, brings with it reprimand, brings with it correction. So it's very important to sort out what is it that I am forgiving myself for, and what is it that I am not forgiving myself for? Because there are some things that if we continually try to forgive ourselves for certain things that actually need not really be addressed, we find ourselves locked in that cycle. Now, some experiences, we will honor and recognize that there is such a thing as the law of attraction, and that one of the fundamental mechanisms of the cosmos is to magnetize like energy systems with other like energy systems. But there are nonetheless some things that come at us uninvited, unsolicited, unexpected, and that there was no part that we consciously played in the event. Now, here we are most certainly not taking accountability for having been hurt or for having been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But we may choose to look at how we have compounded the experience, how we have repeated it time and time again to cement it into our knowing of who we are. So we may have lamented, we may have complained, we may have blamed other people, lashed out in bitterness. So while we may not have had control over the original event, over what the perpetrator did to us, we have certainly played a part in the suffering in the way that the original perpetrator had no control over. Now, I heard it say, I don't know if this is true, this is a philosophical thing, but I have heard it say that babies are hardwired for innocence. They come into the world programmed to love their parents no matter what, regardless of what happens to them. Which means that the first time a baby ever experiences harm caused to them by their parents, they blame themselves because they can't conceive that the parents who are supposed to love them could do something mean to them, you know. And I'm using parents here because that's usually the first relationship that we have when we enter this world. I remember once when my oldest daughter was very young, I took her to the doctor and I said, doctor, I don't know, am I doing it right? You know, am I going to cause her any harm if I put her down for a nap, or if I let her scream? I'm just so tired, I'm confused, I'm frustrated, what do I do? And the doctor looked at me straight in the eye and said, Elizabeth, you could put your baby in a beehive and she wouldn't love you any less. Now think about that, and then think about the fact that the first perpetrator a baby experiences is the same parents. The first time you We raise our voice to our children. You know, when we're tired and frustrated or exhausted, we snap in a certain way, or we say something unreasonable. The first time the baby experiences that, their instinct is to blame themselves. There is something that I have done wrong, something I've done incorrect. The first wound, therefore, that's cemented in our lives, in our minds, is my fault. Now, I'm aware of this in my own life. I practice a phenomenal amount of self-awareness, and I'm aware of my first such trauma occurring when I was 2 years old, and I was told that I was a bad girl and nobody would want to play with me. Now, my life ever since then was tainted by the wondering, is that true? Am I bad? I think I'm good. I want to be good. Is what I'm doing now bad? Is this bad? And that second guessing leaked into every single area of my life for years and years. And it was like that until my second daughter, Penelope, was born. And I held her little tiny body in my arms, and I saw her great big huge brown eyes look up into me. And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that it would be a travesty if she grew up believing herself to be anything other than just right. Believing that whatever experiences or choices were to follow in her life, that she hadn't come from and wouldn't return to innocence. For her to believe that she was unforgivable or irredeemable. And then it struck me like a bell. I was somebody's baby once. And I am allowed to know myself as innocence, as just right. And if that's true for me, then it's true for all. Now, when we grow up, of course, these stories, I'm a bad girl and nobody wants to play with me, get more and more complex. We stop looking at things in innocence and we start looking at things in judgment. We validate the stories that we've chosen to tell and then retell again and again, and we begin to believe the projection. We look at the projection out here and we say, it is true, see, I am a bad girl and nobody wants to play with me. I experienced time and time again losing the intimate, the best, the bestest friend. I lost two best friends to death, many to various betrayals and so on. And this cycle of believing myself to be too bad to be played with was evidenced again and again in my experiences and in my relationships. And so as a defense mechanism, we begin to project our own guilt out onto the world. And then we see the corresponding evidence out there. That's how it works. That's how conscious creation works. And we never, ever, ever cease creating. Now, when we return to things to look at them in innocence, as if they're truly neutral, then the light shines through them. And let me give you a silly example. I'm going to throw my lovely daddy under the bus. I'm sorry, daddy. Now, when Britain went into lockdown, when the coronavirus hit a couple months ago, all of the pubs closed, and it was an institutional crisis for the Brits, but Britons largely by and by are amazing in a crisis, and they complied with the restrictions quite cheerfully and came up with ingenious solutions as they are wont to do. Now, during this time, there was this meme going around with a poem that had been written by Samuel Pepys regarding going to the pubs during the plague, right? Now, this was so relevant and so poignant that I took great delight in it, and I told my dad so. I said, look at this cool thing written by Samuel Pepys. How amazingly relevant is this? And his response was, oh, no, 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 no. I've already fact-checked this on Snopes, and it's a scam. Samuel Pepys never wrote that. It is put out there by fearmongers spreading lies. And he was right. Somebody had faked it. But it hadn't mongered any fear in my heart. And in fact, the only stirring of any suffering that I had experienced from seeing this false meme came when he told me that there should be. That there should be suffering because of this meme. You see, I had taken nothing but delight from it. So let me ask you, if it is possible for me to see good in something when I look at it through the eyes of innocence, can it be true that there is nothing in it other than the motivation of the perpetrator? Or is there God in it? Or is God in everything? And if that's the case, then I can choose to harvest any frequency I like from the moment, but only if I look at it in innocence. Because the moment I look at it in judgment, the potential collapses and it reveals itself to be exactly as I have judged it. That's what my experience becomes. So we must become like a child again to enter the kingdom of God, to practice alignment, to live in flow state, whatever expression you want to use to annotate the quality of living in a particular mindset that allows the knowing of yourself as the flow of truth, as the flow of love. Now, your day is chock full of millions of opportunities to discover a deeper meaning in life, and also millions of opportunities to be disturbed. So your life really is the greatest temple that you could go to do this work of self-realization and forgiveness. And you never need to feel like your purpose is other than what you're currently involved in. So how do you break the pattern of projection and simply return to your innocence, to your knowing of yourself? It is simple, but it does require discipline. And yes, it is your self-realization. Now, with the spiritual maturity that comes with remembering who you really are, a vast burden of guilt is immediately evaporated. And that is, of course, self-forgiveness. It's not more complicated than that. Now, Jesus himself said, "My yoke is light." And of course, he carried the burden of the world and still considered it to be light because of his knowing of who he is, you see. Now, we have a really amazing course that I'm going to tell you about. It's called I Am Truth. In this course, we will work on your specific case, the specific thing that you are wanting to forgive and release. And we'll use a combination of metacognition, simple energy work, and essential oils to bring you fully back into center, to assemble your knowing of yourself back into center, and then give you the macro view that you need to start wiping that stained glass window clean so that you're no longer scrubbing the floor, scurrying around like a, insert appropriate metaphor here. Now, second question. Why are some things stickier than others? Let me tell you something. I had a very tricky relationship with alcohol for decades. It was sort of relationship where I wasn't addicted. It wasn't alcoholism in the traditional sense. It wasn't that I needed a drink, but if I had a drink, I wouldn't just have the one drink. I would literally slide down that slippery slope and end up in a state of drunkenness. I would be less than myself, you see. Now, this was a behavior, a habit that I continued for decades until came the time for me to release it, to forgive that habit and release and move on into more healthful ways of expressing myself and experiencing life. I simply dropped it. Snap, like that. Over and done with. No suffering, no cravings, no struggle. It's just gone. Now, of course, that's because I know what I know and I practice the way I practice. But even so, last year, there was a friend of mine who I adored. I loved her so much, but she was a bit of a drama queen. And there was this one week where she would just not stop texting me with the problems that she had. One thing after another it was. Constantly under attack by the positions of the star in the sky, the energy field of this one guy who walked into the classroom, this policy that had been passed in New York, the thing the person said to her, whatever it was, she was constantly under attack by something. And at the end of the week, instead of meeting her in compassion and hearing her and being there for her, I snapped and said, maybe we need to look at the common thread here, and perhaps there's something we need to address around this victim energy that you're holding in your consciousness. And what did she do? She cut me off. That was the end of the relationship forever. That was harder for me to forgive, to allow, and to move on from than decades of substance abuse. Why is that? Well, it depends always on how deep the trauma is. How close is that circumstance to your first ever window stain, right? The first ever window stain. The moment there's a new story written here, the projection begins, you see. And the earlier the story is in the window, the more time has been for the evidence to start collecting here, you see. The moments of evidence are often known as anchor points. These stitch the trauma into your life's canvas, because the more of these we see, the more damning the evidence is. And so our attention becomes focused on this story. You see, we keep affirming it. We see again and again and again that it is in fact true what's going on up here. So when my friend cut me off for being uncompassionate, this was evidence that I'm bad and nobody wants to play with me. You see? So again, the more of these anchor points there are in life, the more evidence that we've allowed to gather in our life, the more solidified is our attention on the truth that this trauma is real and a part of who we are and what life is about. Now, an example of what this is like is sitting with a therapist week after week, year after year, talking about the same pain. It's like prodding a wound and trying to have it heal. It doesn't really work. It doesn't work like that. Then, in other words, forgiveness has to be a focus issue. We have to think of it as a focus issue. If our focus and attention is on the evidence that this trauma or experience happened, then forgiveness is impossible, because we keep reliving, we keep experiencing it. This is, I'm going to try and use an analogy here to show that if you intend to forgive and release, but the reality of that trauma is so tightly stitched into your life by so many anchor points, you see it everywhere and you continue to affirm it as part of who you are, it's like you have the intention to arrive at the party, right? There's a party going on, it's the best party, and you're invited and you want to go and you're going to go. But on the way, you come to signpost after signpost saying the party you're going to is a scam. It isn't real. It isn't possible. And actually, you need to go to the haunted house round the corner. If you constantly follow the signposts in life, you will constantly be rerouted instead of arriving. You see? You will constantly be seeking the forgiveness instead of arriving at the party. Now, you will get to the party eventually. I promise you that. There is a spot for you at the long table, and you will dine in peace in the kingdom of heaven. You are going to the ball, Cinderella. I promise you. But as long as you're following those signposts, you will have many, many experiences of suffering on the way. Yes? What you need to do is get very, very good at discerning which signposts are pointing to truth and which are pointing to falsehood or an old story. This is a skill that you can learn, and I can support you with that. It's called discernment, and it is the only compass you will ever need. Now, and the third reason why, excuse me, the third reason why some energies are very sticky or some traumas are very hard to release is because we can't understand it. We can't let go of our need to understand it. Yes? Now, we tend to think of our challenges as very big and huge and insurmountable. And when we can't wrap our heads around them, they become monstrously enormous. Why did this have to happen to me? Why did she have to die? Why me? Why my children? Why are the politicians not moving us forward? Why are these awful, horrible people doing these things to these lovely children? I don't understand. I don't understand. And so these challenges, these things that we need to try and bring to forgiveness are so difficult to wrap our heads around. And it's because we're all up close. We get super, super intimate with our troubles sometimes, with our traumas. We look at that smelliness and we sniff it real good. We scratch and sniff that smelly, and we call it shadow work. But then we're sitting in it for so long that what happens is we begin to continuously compound it. Now, let me say, just because we don't understand it does not mean that it doesn't have a perfect place in the tapestry of life. If you take a pixel out of the Sistine Chapel and you look at it real close, you might be tempted to say, I don't understand what this is. It's meaningless and it's ugly. And frankly, it's just smearing my window. It's ruining my view. But if you place it back in the painting, you will see that it fits in perfectly with the whole divine truth. We have the same phenomenon in our own life. We look back, we call it hindsight. We can look back and we can see how something that seemed very terrible in the past, in fact, was the launching pad that we needed to bring us to the perfect place. And that's because we now have a macro view. We're able to see so much more of the picture than we did at the time that we were right inside of it. Yes? Now, if there's something we just cannot understand enough to forgive, then it's possible that the story just hasn't yet come to completion. And then surrender is the only answer. Actually, no, there is another answer. You could choose suffering. But if you don't want to suffer, then you must surrender to it. Now, in our course, I Am Truth, I teach a powerful technique to support the craft of surrender. Now, yes, surrender is mystical, but it's also metaphysical. It is a craft that you can master, that you can hone, cultivate, and become incredibly good at. This will help to allow flow, even when you can't comprehend why something had to happen or why something is going on in the world. What happens is that you release your attachment to the details and you float up where you have a macro view from which point things lose their importance and their impact, and they become mere strings in a harmony, a little bit like letting the air out of a balloon. Poop. It's a lot less threatening when it's floppy, isn't it? Now, the last reason I'm going to talk about for why things stick is because we can't conceive of how to grow without suffering. You know, even the most righteous of us will adamantly insist that we have to grow through pain, or that suffering is where all the lessons lie. And in fact, so many of us use our sob story to validate the nobility of our life. Look how hard I've worked. Look how far I've come. Look how I've suffered. Ergo, I am valid. Ergo, I live a noble life. Now, if this is such a part of our identity that we need to validate ourselves through the sob stories or through the traumas or through the challenges that we've met in our life, then this is a sign that we have invested in a false idol. Yes? Because all of that story, all of those things were, in fact, the manifest result of a projection from a belief. The truth of who we are is divine, and our need to validate ourselves through our story is false idol. So it is true that growth is in suffering, and that growth is in pain, and that lessons are in the challenges. But growth and lessons are in all things, because guess what? God is in all things, which means all things are in all things. So your growth is possible through other frequencies like awe and wonder and curiosity. You are not reliant on your pain in order to grow. It is safe to release it. It is safe to forgive it and move on from it And learning to tap into bliss, self-awareness, realization, and peace in any moment will soon show you just how much more growth is waiting for you on the other side of release. Yes? Does that sound peaceful? Does it sound nice? I certainly think so. Now, the final question. How do we actually do it? Now, this, of course, is the release itself. Let me be completely, utterly frank with you. Now, this transcends religion, but I'm going to use words that you might associate with a particular school of thought, but that's because I'm trying to express something esoteric using linear language. I trust that you understand me when I say there is only one energy in the cosmos that actually transforms pain into love. And that energy is grace. On a human level, we can consciously tap into grace through Christ. Christ is our knowing of ourselves as God, or the embodiment and awareness of one's higher self. That's what Christ is. That's Christ consciousness. I remember who I am. The tools that we use to initiate forgiveness, these are what create and maintain the framework into which the energy flows freely. That's called holding space. So when you hear someone saying holding space, what that means is that they are using particular techniques to create an energetic framework that holds your own projections and paradigms out of a particular space so that grace can flow through. Grace is what heals. That's the only thing. Now, this relationship is a bit like taking a shower after you've had a really long and painful session digging in the garden, right? Now, your knowing of your smelliness, or Christ, is what ignites your intention to have a shower. The water, or grace, is what cleans the dirt away. And your own conscious actions, right? These are what initiate and conduct the process that becomes your experience of washing. Yeah, you got that? Now, that doesn't mean you do it well. No, you might step into the shower wearing your filthy clothes. You might pour a bottle of bleach over your head. You might turn the heat right up to maximum. Okay, this is not useful, even though the water itself is as wet as ever, right? Grace is grace. Water is wet. Doesn't mean that you're going to have a good experience of forgiveness despite your intention. However, if you know how to set the temperature and you know which bottle contains the right soap, then the process of cleaning and releasing the dirt is fast, efficient, and pleasurable. Now, some energies are stickier than others, and some traumas are more established than others in our identities, and some of our archetypal enemies that we love to hate are complexly written into our plotline. Doesn't matter. It can all be transformed. So should we rely on time to heal every wound? We can. But of course, time heals nothing. It simply brings more opportunities to see things from new perspectives. And that's why time is thought to heal wounds, because over time we do gather wisdom and perspectives that help to release things. But of course, the only way time can do that for us is if it keeps bringing those experiences back around again, so we can continue to have the emotional response and the mental response and the feeling response and the action response. And maybe, just maybe, at one time, we will interrupt that cycle and choose differently. But if we want fast release, fast forgiveness, and fast relief from the suffering, sounds okay, sounds nice, then we can use metacognition, simple energy work, and essential oils in a specific protocol to systematically shine the light on the right stories in the right order, right? So now I've proven to you that forgiveness is mystical, metaphysical, and physical, that the alignment of these is what brings release, and that this alignment can be chosen and consciously orchestrated, with simple energy work, metacognition practices, and essential oils. If you follow an orderly protocol of metaphysical practices in order to facilitate a release, the result is very fast. Sounds good, doesn't it? Now, true release means a liberation. It's a forgiveness and liberation of all the after effects of the harm that was originally caused. It doesn't take away the experience for you, but it removes the link between the triggers all around you and the stress response that you experience when those triggers cross your path. So now I'm going to give you a quick energy technique for you to use to support your forgiveness work. Please place your feet on the floor. Please sit up straight. Please take a few deep breaths. And with your fingers, one by one, let your finger rotate around its mate 10 times one way and then 10 times the other way before moving on to the next finger. Now, that subtle energy that flows from your cellular consciousness and becomes your vibrational projection, this also flows through your body along lines that are known as meridians. These are the lines that acupuncturists and acupressure practitioners use. There is a pooling of these meridians in your hands, in the palms of your hands and in your fingers particularly. And you also have an enormous amount of sensitivity in your fingers, particularly in your fingertips. And when you do this activity of just spinning your hands or rotating your fingers around each other, first one way and the other, you activate the flow of that subtle energy and you really enhance your ability to feel it. So once you've done that, hold your hands near each other like this without touching. If you touch them, you create a circuit and you won't be able to feel as much. But if you break that circuit, there'll be a pooling of energy between your hands and you'll really, really be able to feel something visceral. You might feel it as tingling or prickling. You might feel it as heat. You might feel it as almost like a pressure, like opposite magnets. And that's usually how I experience it. Now, this is a phenomenally powerful healing energy. This is the same energy that's used by Reiki practitioners, that's used by healing touch. This is the same energy that's used by Christians practicing the laying on of hands. This is Christ energy, because this is this is your essence. This is spirit that hasn't been formed or sullied or tainted by paradigm. It's still pure. And so this is a beautiful healing energy. Now place it over your heart. The heart center is associated with release and forgiveness. That makes sense, doesn't it? It's also associated with desire. Now, desire is the first step in all of creation. Before God was able to breathe word into the universe, he must have wanted to desire it, right? Or there must have been a desire. We can make some logic out of something that is completely ineffable and mysterious, but we can understand that if I am going to forgive something, I need to really want it first. So I want you to tap into your desire to forgive. You might want to bring to the forefront of your mind the person or the situation or the habit or the thought that you're wanting to release, that you're willing to release. Bring that and then feel how much you really want it. And now, take some time off and relax. And close your eyes. And in your own way, whatever way is natural and good for you, ground yourself into now and fully be here. Really sink in. And close your eyes if you haven't already. And let yourself just be guided along a simple flow of intention and desire as brought to your awareness by my voice. and hear this prayer coming from the heart of the sweet baby that you once were, with the little fingers and the tiny little fingernails and those sweet little toes and that lovely powdery smell on the back of your head, just the little one you were. And here is what that heart is praying. I forgive you. I forgive you for your choices. You've made lovely ones and horrible, horrible, smelly ones, and it's all part of the dance that we're doing with life. I forgive my response to your choices. I know it's not your fault that I couldn't find my way on the same path that you're walking. I also forgive my way of choosing. And I'm grateful that I made the moves that I made, even though I sometimes failed spectacularly and broke hearts on the way. I forgive myself for the harm that I've done to you by my thoughtlessness or error or malice. And I release you who were broken by my hand or word so that you can fully remember yourself again. My poor judgment and influence made you forget for a little while. We will both find healing and atonement. I forgive you for energetically rejecting me. Thank you for being who you needed to be and thus releasing me to a better life. I don't know what you needed at the time, and it's not required for me to know anything other than that I wasn't it. I forgive you for having your own unique perspective on what truth is. I release you to explore it in your own way and in your own time. And I release my need to judge your experiences. I don't need to know anything about you other than that you are of the same source and substance as I am, and you are beloved. I forgive you for making me believe that it's possible to be without love, that it's possible to be lost and alone. I forgive you for making me believe in loss and separation, and for making me believe that failure is dangerous. I forgive you for making me believe that I'm guilty and unworthy and wrong. And it's not your fault that I took on those perspectives and wore them like a crown of razor wire and a royal robe of shit. I forgive myself for surrendering my sovereignty to that shit robe, and for accepting for so many years the life of suffering that results from that way of being. It is good to shed that robe. I forgive, and I am forgiven. What a miracle is grace. Take a few deep breaths and return to now. Doesn't need to be a complicated ritual. You can go deep and come back in the snap of a second. I want to leave you with just a few things. What would it like to be free? What would it be like to be peaceful? To have the mental and emotional turmoil that's leftover nonsense from the past. What would it be like to have that just dissolved, just shed? Is it worth a shot to learn a way of grace that is practical and real? Is it worth a shot to deep dive into the mechanics of creation, into the mechanics of consciousness? To put forgiveness at the top of your list until you know how to perfectly forgive yourself, until you know how perfectly forgiven you already are. Be therefore vigilant against denying what is still in need of forgiveness in you, because what you will deny, you will project. So this is it for you. This is the time. This is the time right now that we light workers must collectively do this. We need to remove the false notes of the past so that we can better serve in the turmoil to come. Do you understand this? You're being called to do this. I will support you. I'm available to support you as your spiritual director and as your ontologist. We have this course. It's called I Am Truth. It's incredibly powerful. You'll go through 5 weeks of coaching and energy work to help you master this most important craft of life, forgiveness. If you're ready to let it go, email me at the email address that's going to be on a little card at the end of this message. I'm going to leave it up for a little bit so you can take a note. Send me an email or go straight to www.kerinschoolofthought.com/I am truth. I'm going to put that on the end card too, because this is your time. Thank you very much for watching. You are beloved. Good night.